Okay, so the thing that I want to do is I want the gradient button to show a simple little representation of the current gradient set, and I mean really simple. In fact, all it's going to do, well, what will it do? The first thing that I thought was I could just take four colors from the gradient set, leftmost bottom and top and rightmost bottom and top, and arrange them, arrange a quad on the face of the button with those colors defining its corners, with the corners drawn in those colors. Where is my... It's right here. No, it's not. It's right here. Gradient button. Set gradient. And there it is, and I believe it is being called at the correct times. It's just it hasn't been filled in. And another aspect of it is finishing draw. Justify. Yeah, so it's a simplified button in that it doesn't account for an icon, it just says you may want text on it. And it will draw the text in a slightly wrong way, but drawing the text isn't the main deal. The main deal is, prior to drawing the text, drawing a rectangle. And now actually, I'm just going to have a quick check of the color button and see what it does when it sets its color. Okay, all it does is that. What does it do when it... Yeah, all it does is that. That's pretty cunning of me. How did I do that? This is how I did it. Right, yeah. So, the gradient button's not going to be able to be quite as kind of nice looking as this one in a way, because this creates a color set and a pair of costumes, and it generates them when the color button is created, and the costumes are the things that determine how the GUI draws the gadgets by by standard. What am I trying to say? The costumes determine the standard part of the gadget that gets drawn. So in the case of a zone or a clear panel, the set of costumes associated with that gadget are empty or blank. In the case of lots of gadgets like buttons and ordinary panels, the costumes, each gadget having a set of costumes, one for each state the gadget might be in. The costumes are just set up to be associated with the standard drawing skin that the GUI is currently drawing. You can change the skin, you can change the colour set, and so I'm getting sidetracked on the description of this because it is kind of significant. The costumes describe how a gadget will be drawn. One costume for each state the gadget can be in. But the costumes are made of the association between the skin, which is the method to draw a rectangle, an image, and a set of colours, a colour set. God, I was going through that because I was actually having to remind myself, and I was saying, yeah, here's out costume and in costume being defined. There are a load of standard costume definitions that the GUI creates and are used to draw the scene as you see it, which can all be changed if you want to. So this draws actually from one of those costume definitions, the normal skin. So this gadget is set up in such a way that whatever the currently used normal skin of the GUI is, it will use it, but it will create its own costume out of it, with the standard square image to be used, and its own C set, which it is just defined as color, black, black, white, black. A color set has 4 colors and a final, well, 4 just, well, it's all vague, you know, I made it up as I went along. It's got actually 5 colors associated with it. Main, 1, 2, 3 and font. Now that is not logical, hardly any use colors 1, 2 and 3. Anyway. And the font is just a way of saying gadgets which commonly use fonts can refer to this color. The other thing is all of these colors are passed by reference and are just references. So because I create this color set which is unique to the gadget and pass in this color reference which is also unique to the gadget, whenever I change that color reference, this color set, well, it's not that the color set changes, but the reference, the contents of the object at that reference have changed. Equally, the costume set is made of a series of references. So this color set refers to this, which contains the color, which refers to color. So all I do in set color is set the color, set the value of color. And then I don't need to do anything else in finish draw except add the text. It does have this other option for being lit, because I was aware that it was hard to, well, it's for putting a little border around a text, around a color button if you want it. I use it to distinguish the selected color on the palette in the color picker requester, the color requester. Now the point of that detour was it's a way of saying the gradient button is not going to be able to be so clever without me defining a new skin, which I can't be bothered to do. I want the gradient button to be drawn. So, to be drawn just using the standard skin. Apart from anything, it would mean that if I changed the standard skin, I'd have to redefine the gradient button skin as well. Don't want to do that. I think that the best I can do is make a costume with a color for the gradient button and pick the color reasonably. But then I will just have to draw a 4-color corner quad just within the border of that button in the finished draw prior to drawing the text. Now, it's not really the best thing to do, but it's a thing to do. Now, what do I need to do to define all that? And can I make it nicer than that, basically? Can I say, yeah, just determine the definition you want on this field, because actually, if I make a kind of thing that just generates a field from a gradient set, then I could use that same thing to generate the field to appear in the backdrop of the gradient editor window. And I wouldn't need one of the same definition in the backdrop of the gradient color button. I just need a little one. So I want to be able to decide the definition. And I want to be able to create it and have it basically store its state unless it's resized. Yeah, create it and have it store its state unless it's resized, or unless one of the values in it changes, unless you just call on it to refresh itself, having, me as editor knowing that the gradient set has changed. I just demand the button updates itself, or the field in the back of the gradient set editor. So gradient button is all very well, but I need something else. And I'm going to stick it in here just now, and it's going to be called something like class gradient field. And it's not going to extend anything. It's just going to be a kind of class, I think, for now. It will have a draw method. That might get past some other stuff. Probably will. It will have. Will it get past some stuff? I don't think it will. I think I'll say this thing has an x and it has a y. It has a width and it has a height. It has. Now, this is a question. The thing I want to consider is, what do I want to be presented with when I'm coming to draw this? Because every frame, for the time being, it will be drawn by the GUI. That's a thing I will change when the larger GUI restructure takes place. I do have a pretty sound scheme for making my GUI draw itself much more efficiently, but for the time being it's still fast. The main thing is this needs to be fast. It needs to present or have some piece of information ready for when draw gets called. It just rattles through numbers and spits out vertices and colors. So, when I imagine that loop, I mean, it's still going to spit out triangles. It's just going to spit out a set of triangles, but the colors and the positions of the triangles have to be quick to ascertain. So when I imagine that loop, I imagine it drawing or deciding the grid, the colors of the vertices. And I can store, I suppose the thing I can do is just store every single one. Yeah, that's the sensible thing to do. I mean, the alternative is that something which involves storing less and fewer sort of arrays and stuff is storing the step sort of value. I know the x, the y, the width, the height. If I know the number of columns and the number of rows, then, and I know the red, green and blue values at the top left, and I have a single set of floats which describe the change that occurs across a column to those values and the change that occurs across a row to those values, then I can just sort of deduce as I draw it by adding values to those numbers. But let's face it, that's not necessary to do. I could use a system like that to generate a series of values I just store and read when it comes time to. So I will do it that way. I need to store all the values. And what am I actually storing? Am I going to be brave enough to use my pen to think about it? Look at that. That's a classic, so I'll save that. And then I will save as. This is clunky. I'm going to make my own program to make this easy. Paint 3D project, yes, and call it the cursor. I'm going to call it rec, and I'm going to give it a name like grad field going to think about it like this. I'm going to say this all goes away, and this becomes this. Is it behaving? More or less. Okay, so I'm going to have to be drawing this series of triangles to any place on the screen. When I call this, oh look at that, will this work again? Pop. What you are hearing is me describing, yeah, breaking my pen and then repairing it again. And that apparently being the thing. Oh, that helps. No, that doesn't help. I broke my pen and permanently broke it. Okay, right. Sorry for gibberish. When I call the method that draws an instance of the gradient field, I'm going to be calling it from one of my gadget finish draws, or I can call it from anywhere. But usually it'll be like inside the gradient button finish draw, and I'll just call it with what? Or will I be setting its position? Yeah, I'll be setting its x, y, width and height. Nah, I don't want to do that. I want to have its x and y to be 0. So when I call draw, I do want to be passing an x and y to it. I don't want to be storing the x and y, I want to be storing the width and height. Right, okay, so this is me thinking already. Draw will accept x and y, because that's the thing that might change. Like the gadget may change position, but it won't change size without something specific being called, which is finish resize, which I will have to take advantage of in my, it's detecting a left mouse button, finish resize, which is another virtual method on the gadget, which is for situations like this, where the contents of your gadget, upon resizing, need to do something else, which happens a lot. Buttons have a finish resize to reposition their text within them if their size actually changes. So inside gradient, wow, I just cannot use this thing sometimes, and it thinks I'm now clicking the left button incessantly. Gradient button, that's not written to be read, that's written for me to think about. Gradient button will make use of finish resize, and finish draw will call draw. The gradient buttons finish draw will call draw. Draw will accept an x and a y. I don't need to store an x and a y with this field, but what's going to happen when I draw it is it's going to just call something that draws possibly triangles, possibly rectangles, or maybe it won't do that. Maybe it will actually just draw the thing itself, because it can sort of, because I'm going to be calling this draw from within finish draw all the time, I should make this a gadget or something to make it more explicitly a GUI object, but anyway. I can just access the GUI's canvas cheekily, but I'll just do it. And what I want to send out is something like this. There's probably a better way to do this to get a nicer gradient, like it's either this way or I go the other way the whole way, but it's a load of triangles. And the number of triangles, I shouldn't have drawn that in because it's just annoying. I wonder if this will work. Watch this. Oh, it kind of does, except the eraser's very shoddy. That's the other end of my cheap little pen. Anyway. So, yeah, I should have known. Let me break in to fix this again. Yeah, breaking and fixing. So what I have is a width, I have a height, but I also have columns and rows, and I have a row size, and I have a column size. This thing is going to become a waste of time soon. Breaking and fixing it isn't really fixing it, is it? So I've got row sizes and column sizes, and I have the gradient set. So I will get past x and y by the draw mode, by the draw method, into the draw method, and it has to start here, and based on its knowledge of the width, the column size, the height, and the row size, spit out a lot of triangles. Now I suppose I can just keep a single array which upon well, a single array which stores all those sizes, you know, I could do that. Well, which stores the positions of, you know, columns plus 1 times rows plus 1 vertices. That's like, I think that's the reasonable number of vertices if I'm not just calculating it as I draw it. I'm going to stop using this thing for now. I will try breaking it more and fixing it more later. So do I want to, yeah, so basically it's going to be the fastest thing to do is to store this array of vertices. But then I guess I need like I need a pair of methods to act on the gradient field, one of which is gradient set, and one of which is size set, or set gradient and set size. I can't do this with a mouse at all. Anyway, two different things. Set gradient would be called by the, you know, by outside things like the gradient, like the gradient editor window would call set gradient when the apply button is clicked on all the relevant little things that need to display the gradient. Anyway, so also maybe I should allow changing the number of rows and columns after it's created. Probably not. I mean, I could, you know, it's just a question of changing the size of those arrays, then recalculating the gradient, and I guess, well, yeah, that's about it. I might end up just calling set size or something. It's not a problem with that, but a thing about that is that means storing which gradient this is based on, so that I can resample it when the columns and rows values change, because obviously the color values in each of those, because that's the other thing I was going to get to, is it's not actually just storing the vertices. Each of these corners should store a color value as well. And this is going to produce a strange pattern because of the order I draw the triangles. I've never really found a way, I'm sure there are, just using, by being cleverer, but anyway, it will at least produce a gradient. So each of these corners also needs a color value, but the color value can be an unsigned int, so I don't need lots of instances of color. It will take a little bit to set up, but then having said that, it shouldn't need refreshing, almost ever really, only when the gradient, in the case of the gradient button, only when the apply button is set in the gradient set editor, and in the case of the backdrop of the gradient set editor, only when changes are made to individual colors. What time am I at? 25. So I've basically been just sitting and discussing and thinking about this for 25 minutes. But this is a plan, so I need an array of all these points, and I need an array of all these colors. So do I just want to use my vertices? I don't think I do. I think I just want to use a straight up array. I can, yeah, I will. Because it's not going to be transformed by matrices or anything, maybe I should think of it in those terms, but when this, maybe I should think of it in those terms. If I made it out of vertices, I could scoot it through a matrix, but I'm not going to think about it in those terms just now. I'm going to think about it in terms of, I'm going to call this verts, because this is more appropriate to be called verts. But this is just float. And colors. And that's unsigned int. Both of indeterminate size. And I think that when this object is instantiated, I'll set its resolution. In other words, I don't want to store that. That's not a thing that it thinks about. It just gets a width and height. No, it gets an x and y. Hang on. I will just add columns int should be unsigned int equals 1 rows unsigned int equals 1 verts. Okay. And I think that that's the way it's going to be. Just a 1 by 1 square, yeah. So, what that means, I'm going to try and keep this lean. I'm always tempted to add in stuff like vert count, color count, but I know those are just there inside the array structs. Anyway, new columns and rows. So, so the number of verts is columns plus 1 times rows plus 1 times 2, I think. If I had a thing that was just 2 columns and 2 rows, like that, the number of verts is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 2 columns, 2 rows, 2 plus 1 is 3, times 2 plus 1 is 3, 3 times 3 makes 9, times 2 makes 18. So, do I bother making a local, or do I just say verts equals new float? columns plus 1 times rows plus 1 times 2. Colors. Well, no, because what I'll do is I'll say local numv int equals that bit. And this equals numv times 2. And colors equals new unsigned int numv. Every single time I get this wrong. It's like, should it be in square brackets when there's not like a... Because sometimes you can just declare like literals. Okay, if that's the way it is. And you do something different when you're declaring the literals. Anyway. That's verts and colors. And I will say columns and rows, yeah, columns equals C and rows equals R. And I'm going to say if C equals 0, C equals 1, and if row equals 0, row equals 1. These are unsigned ints, so that should be all I have to do. Now, in a sense that's it. But it's not a lot of use. So, what I think is I want to be able to set the gradient, or update gradient, yeah, set gradient, and then you pass a gradient set. And I do want to accept a null value, because it should look like just setting up everything with white. So columns and rows and width and height, really. When you knew it, I do want you to be able to determine, I don't know, and width equals width and height equals height. And I will say set gradient, and I will say set, well, I don't have to bother doing this bit here. I can just say set size, width, height. Don't give me that. Set size is different, yeah. Method set size void width float equals 10.0, height. And maybe I'll do set size first, because what I'm trying to do with set size is arrange the positions of all the verts based on this given width, height, and the number of rows and columns I know I possess. So, what I have to do is say local cwidth float equals, well, first off I'll say width equals w and height equals h. And I'll say cell width equals width divided by the float of columns, and cell height equals height say, I will call it cell width, cell height. Because then, as usual, I want to use my cursor x float equals 0.0, cursor y float equals 0.0. Then I want to say local I int equals 0, and then I want to repeat until I is greater than or equal to vert's length. And I want to say I plus equals 1. No, it doesn't. Plus is equal to 2. So, I want to say vert at I equals cx, and vert of I plus 1 equals cursor y. Then, man, I'm going to make a meal of this. Local current column float, no, unsigned int equals 0, current row. I know I'm making a meal of this. I'm sure there's a quicker way. It's just this really makes it bloody clear. Current row equals 0. I don't need to know the current row really, and I'm going to try and just get away with not knowing it. Then I say, you got a problem with vert. Okay, yeah, because it's called verts. Then I say, what on earth do I say? I say cx plus equals cell width, and then I say current column plus equals 1, and then I say if current column is, I can just say equal to, but I'll say greater than or equal to columns, current column equals 0, current x equals 0, current y plus equals cell height. Scoot around until you get to the end of it. And that is it. Is it? I think that is it. I'm going to go with that being it. I probably have made a mistake, but we'll see. An inset gradient. If you're past no gradient, then really all I want to do, I think, is say for local I int fine unsigned int equals 0 until colors length next. And I want to say colors I equals G color white AV. So if you call it with a null gradient, it'll just fill in all the colors white. So the cell, the whatever you're looking at will appear white. But if you give it a gradient set and return, but if you give it a gradient set, it does something totally different. Now, like the way this, man, how much work do I want to put it to get this thing? Because the way the gradient sets work, I could sample the gradient set at any position through its horizontal width and get a new gradient, but doing that does mean sampling all those other gradients. You know, I could be more restrictive and just say, well, you give me a gradient set, I'll take my widths, I'll take the column positions, like the positions of the columns of verts, and I will go through the gradient set and find the closest existing gradient in that set. But that is not what I'm going to do, because setting this gradient is a thing that only has to be called when the gradient changes. So that's just, yeah, it's not what I'm going to do. What I'm going to do is, it's 40 minutes. What I'm going to do is I am going to have it generate the full set. Generate a set for every column. You can keep the column numbers down, and what I might do with for the gradient set editor window is just line up the columns exactly with the actual sets. In fact, when I think about it, because that won't save me just generating a set, it will still generate a set. I'm going to do it that way anyway, but I'm going to have a cup of coffee before I go on to do that. I will complete the creation of the color array in the gradient field.